I think there's been more discussions than ever in how to be politically correct, in the sense that nobody really knows unless you're the one who's saying stuff or listing stuff. You don't know somebody else's perspective other than yours. Like when somebody says something, do they really say what they mean, or do they have like two meanings, or does it mean nothing? And am I overthinking it? Um, well, welcome to the club if you are. So I think on this topic, I think for starters, I think objectivism, stoicism, and a little bit of linguistic purity, and don't worry, I'll dive into like what that means. And a little bit of existentialism are gonna be the key to just getting a point across here. Um, so how I see it is like following the footsteps of stoicism and exercising the will to be numb upon circumstances that provoke emotions, and to pay no heed to all that displays a false idea of meaning is quite difficult for one or so reason, and I would identify it as phlegmatically existent, although conditions do apply in this, with acknowledgement for this problem, for the desired flaw for one to combat with no vulnerability requires basic senses, because there comes one who must know his enemies to see who himself is to fight his rival. And I would like to say that the basis of this relies on our standards of expressions, but what matters here most is that consciousness, and how independent it can be. To how do we truly hold ourselves accountable if we were never even certain of ourselves? Um, Even in the given object, it becomes a subject of impurity no matter what, if it's attempted upon to be understood. And I think in some kind of sick humor, it's engulfed by its meaning, and what a meaning means to the eyes that can only try to see through what it sees. Like who knows? An eye sees what it's really supposed to see, because an eye just sees what it sees. Um, and I think that mystery is evident to let me say here that this is why this philosophy of life brings itself as something new to the table. So yeah, back to the home base. In a nutshell, objectivism underlines the control, and it directs it right at the government to govern those under its own system. Um, um, it is a political belief, not really familiarized in this era um, of democracy. So it's like reasoning reality with the same reality, which is our dependent in this case. Fighting fire with the same fire. Um, if you do see the correlations here, this does make sense actually. So here we go. Before we anchor us away into the absolute middle of nowhere, I believe there are some insights to highlight beforehand. The precursor to questioning objectivism, how to identify it in identity or system. Then our own perceptions and its own perceptions on its own validity and certainty. I would like to shed a light on how we get in touch with how we are logically cognitive, to get our message and point across without them getting distorted in the process, or how do I call it, lost in translation. So it also stated that all intricate values and false beliefs should be abandoned, completely. So, like, however, it still supports the cause of being yourself and pursuing a sense of reality, in order to learn how to live. And the antonym of this subjectivism exercises what's in its name, are upside down compared to objectivism. So it argues with the counterpoint that one definition of morality depends on his or her individuality, and that is just to preserve this as lawfully universal. Um, the main difference between the rock and the hard place we're kind of stuck on is that one sees that there is an answer to the seemingly unanswerable question. Meanwhile, the other says is impossible with certainty. Polar opposites. Here we go. And so the um, question here is that is there a universally ideal world? Yeah, I think that would be the question here. And that personally, I would think this is something that should be observed holistically. And I guess this will be a video for later. Uh, in my point of view, I would say that being oneself is not a provisional technique necessarily, because objectivism proposes that the gamut of concrete society can only be a mirror. Um, this is why there are multitudes of irony and hypocrisy in Ayn Rand's philosophy, as many others claim so, and that some might say that objectivism is not even objective, and it's an element of dogma that can't even exist without the opposing ideology. And I think some would say that this is the uh, fallacy of paradox itself. Who knows? And in analysis, I would like to refer in a motif to this um, log of thoughts. Linguistic Purity by Wittgenstein, it's a theory by him. It's on a parallel to our understanding of pretty much anything that suggests. For example, when we see something, we naturally see it with the meaning we label them all over it with, or what we would describe it as either vaguely or concisive. By this, we are trapped under universal terms to comprehend ideas, thus grasp them more tangible, and the true face of thoughts cannot be expressed if a language makes the speaker question whether he himself can be the message that goes across to a mind. If there is an essence to an object, we can't really see it. In reality, everything's a rabbit hole disguised as a rabbit hole. And in that rabbit hole, we will all cease to exist whilst falling. I think so. In case I haven't done it clearly enough, I would like to emphasize this again that a man is like water, and that an existence is a mere marquee or a sheer projection of his or her mind, and ultimately, it's the mind that meets itself where it is in the present, and thus becoming itself repeatedly again and again. So a mind sustains itself constantly dwindling on the winding tightrope, and on this, a sentient intellectual seems like an oxymoron to me. Yet those who prefer self-control over personal feelings, I would say this is the fat fox of their lifelong hunting season. Being thicker is a mental capability, and achieving a high self-awareness is the unobsolete man's motto to not decay against time. Okay, just hear me out here, but a case in point, Major Fox Ironheart Knight could wear the flesh of steel and tackle the dragon to say his religion is chivalry, but remain mute as an advocate for its own cowardice. Because the language of fear is never a lie, in terms of some essence, that is. I would say this is a good analogy to Stoicism. You adapt a state of mind or a different way of thinking, and you become responsible for it, as it becomes a medium for you to see through reality and understand life. I mean, some people do. I don't know. For those Stoics, they see themselves like crusaders, and that life itself is mind over matter, really, and self-control is really their epitaph. On existentialism, hazarding the dangers of misadventure, and never knowing when demise tears life itself apart into unrecognizable shreds. One must acknowledge that suffering is an umbrella term for emotions that rather dissolve in the rain. If it serves its purpose or doesn't, just distort it. A society is a tsunami of raindrops, and it fears the drought from the small gaps in the drain. Arrogance might be the best way to say one can be driven from to express the feeling, or extreme gloominess, or like anger, rage. Um, those feelings are like a non-verbal form of communication, yet it also says something. For if there's like a reason behind act done after the same old act, there could be a miserable crack in a person that we fail to recognize, and by this I don't mean a crack on the skin. Um, and again, distress that demonetizes legitimacy and instead demonstrates how one should think as the only way to be truly honest to yourself, to the public, or a fellow person. Um, or even a vivid concept like death or life. When suffering from these sources are unforgivable. Although yeah, on the other hand, for those with no reasons, I see it as a waving cloud of epiphany that calls upon them to pay dues when they don't even owe it. Um, yeah, like I said, no cause. Curiosity becomes the act and the reason itself. That's how I would see it. Just as much as narrow enough, this is superficial skin. Um, Catharsis behind these people are devoid of practical meanings, as it's not meant to be defined and caged, but beyond the terms of understanding in which only us benefit from, as us who express our feelings, and we are those who have our own feelings within. And means ostracizing essence from its vessel, we present pieces of us as mere marionettes. Um, I'm really against the idea of like one person using like a philosophy as like a way to live, because I think an ideology um, doesn't nullify one's pain from like just breaking down or breaking apart. Um, I guess the point of having a philosophy as a way of life is just trying to lessen the pain, or to just have a way to cope with it. But um, living doesn't have like a method. Like it just is life. I don't think it can understand life, I guess, but it can't understand what it really means. We know what it means to us, sure, but like that's just the general terms. Um, what the, so what I mean by this is that individual loses trust over his or her reality and later a vision of undisputed essence in his or her own self. People lose themselves and kill themselves, and feel the pain since they remain alive even after. Um, More specifically, by the pain, I mean the pain is not of death, not the fact that he has become his own monster, um, but it's that he knows himself at last, and that he arrived to his destination. Like he feels empty because he got what he wanted, and he's where he wanted to be just his like whole life, or and that he feels like he knows himself now. He's not a stranger to himself. Um, that's why this cohesion of nature, collectively titled Archipelagos of Arrogance, selfishness can be beast, absolute beast, in a form of instincts. Um, a group of backstabbers are collectively called backstabbers. Finite to this name by the betrayals they perform despite the norm. I'm sorry about that. So, anyways, some species, well, stray further from each other and are never ardent to whether they sink or not. The species, I mean, we're all that kind of archipelagos, not together as like one island, but we have our own distances between us. So we're not one person, different individualities. Um, if so, if one focuses on oneself ultimately, that is sufficient for a man to not be weary or feel empty. He's unsuccessful, like well-lived, really. There are thoughts that are meant to surpass the state of matter they're in, like, or to be beyond daydreams they are, or mere endeavors, or even clumsiest pokes at the unknown. Doctor thoughts, and we are damned to be alone in our own mind, and the only thought we have in this hell are that we all suffer the equal agony of imprisonment, that certain pain and imprisonment. But this doesn't make oneself sure of solitude from his second heart. It's not enough. The, the, the pain isn't gone. Uh, so I think my last statement on this is that according to this belief, we are the islands stranded above the waters, and we're patient to drown. And in the meanwhile, we're only breathing. Yeah, we're alive when we are, and we're dead when we're dead. Take what you will, I guess, because it'll be the idea only you can ever see for yourself. Yeah. I think I'm not sure if this really just gonna summed up my view on like political correctness or like how people should judge themselves or their own perceptions on their own perceptions. That is, if that makes any sense. I hope this was concise enough for this to end on a good note. Yeah. So happy birthday, and make sure to sleep tight.